The Conqueror died in an unbelievably gruesome manner, but what happened to his body at the funeral was far more horrific. William the Conqueror came from Normandy in northern France, but few realized that the Normans weren't actually French, they were Vikings. While William did speak French, his lineage was unmistakably Norse. Speaking of William's lineage, there's another truth that can't be ignored: his scandalous beginnings. Before he became known as William the Conqueror, he was known by a far less flattering title, William the Bastard. His father, Robert, was the powerful Duke of Normandy, but his mother came from much humbler beginnings. Despite the social divide, the two fell deeply in love, but they could not be married, hence the terrible nickname. Despite his illegitimate status, William inherited Normandy from his father, but when he was a teenager, a rebel named Yi of Normandy forced him to flee and declared himself Duke. But William was not a helpless child. At nearly 18, he had spent his entire life fighting to survive. Now it was time to fight back. A year later, he returned to reclaim his title, this time with the support of the King of France. Together they marched north to crush Yi of Normandy and his rebel allies. William personally charged into battle, and he emerged victorious, proving he was more than just a boy defending his claim. He was a warrior ready to wield his sword to protect it. But the bloodshed was far from over. William the Conqueror grew into a broad-shouldered, powerful man with a deep, commanding voice. He spent most of his life in peak physical condition, proving his strength time and again on the battlefield. This was no ruler who governed from a throne. He fought alongside his men and was renowned for his skill as both a warrior and a horseman. Though William had reclaimed his duchy, enemies continued to rise against him. For the next decade, he fought many rebellions, sharpening his skills as a military leader. These battles forced him into the conqueror history would remember. However, securing power wasn't just about winning wars. Marriage could help William affirm his power in Normandy. In 1049, William negotiated a marriage alliance with Count Baldwin V of Flanders, arranging to wed his daughter Matilda. This union would secure a powerful ally, but there was one problem. Matilda had no interest in marrying the illegitimate son of a duke. However, William the Conqueror was not a man who accepted no as an answer. His first meeting with Matilda of Flanders was anything but romantic. When he proposed, she outright rejected him. His response was ruthless. Before she could ride off, he grabbed her by the braids and violently pulled her from her horse. Despite this disastrous beginning, William and Matilda eventually married. Against all odds, their union proved to be remarkably loving, tender, and faithful. William never took any mistresses, and he remained devoted to Matilda throughout her life. When William was away, he entrusted Normandy to Matilda, who was no ordinary 11th-century woman. Countless nobles sought to reclaim the duchy for themselves, but Matilda outmaneuvered them all, ensuring Normandy remained firmly under William's control. Despite its rocky start, their marriage became a true partnership. But that still leaves one big question. When did William finally, conquer something? England likely wasn't on William's mind until 1051, when King Edward the Confessor shockingly named William as his heir. It was an unusual choice. William was Edward's uncle's grandson, a distant relation at best. But family ties weren't the only issue if William wanted England's throne. He would have to fight for it. Edward's decision baffled many, but no one opposed it more than his father-in-law, Godwin, Earl of Wessex. Godwin had orchestrated his daughter's marriage to Edward with a clear goal to secure the crown for his own descendants. Not only had Edward failed to produce an heir, but now he intended to hand the throne to a foreigner. Godwin wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Edward the Confessor died in January 1066, leaving behind a political disaster of his own making. Years earlier, he had promised the throne to William, but on his deathbed, he changed his mind and named Godwin's son Harold his successor. The English nobles welcomed the decision, relieved to see one of their own take the crown. But one man was far from pleased, William. Edward had all but promised him the throne, and William had no intention of letting that go. One way or another, he was going to get his crown. After Edward's death, Harold took the throne, but his rule was immediately contested. He wasn't the only one with a cling to England, and rival factions soon emerged, each fighting for their own piece of the kingdom. By 1066, England had become a real-life Game of Thrones. As the turmoil unfolded, William watched and waited. When the dust settled, Harold had emerged victorious. This was exactly what William had been waiting for. It was time to strike. William finally set sail for England, entrusting his wife Matilda to rule in his absence. Once William landed in England, he moved swiftly to Hastings, where he built a castle and established his base of operations. But he had a problem. Harold wasn't coming to him. If William wanted a battle, he would have to make it happen. So he unleashed his men on the English countryside. The Normans pillaged villages, burned farms, and laid waste to the land, all to draw Harold out. Unable to ignore the devastation, Harold gathered his army and marched straight for William, like a moth to a flame. Then came the day that would change England forever, the Battle of Hastings. Few realized just how brutal that battle truly was. It began at 9 in the morning and raged for an entire day. At first, the Battle of Hastings went disastrously for William. The English, positioned atop a ridge, formed an impenetrable shield wall, repelling the Normans again and again while inflicting heavy casualties. Some of William's troops completely lost their nerve and fled the battlefield in panic. Then a terrifying rumor spread like wildfire through the Norman ranks. Word got out that William had been slain. His army teetered on the brink of collapse until William himself tore off his helmet and rode to the front lines, proving he was very much alive. The sight of their commander reinvigorated the Normans, and with renewed determination they turned the tide of the battle. Eventually, King Harold fell, likely struck by an arrow straight through the eye. With their leader gone, the English forces crumbled. At long last, the fighting stopped. William was victorious. William ordered the bodies of the English to be left where they lay, abandoned to rot on the battlefield. When Harold's mother offered to pay her son's weight in gold for his remains, William refused. He had other plans for the so-called king's body. William had his remains thrown into the ocean. As far as he was concerned, the throne had been his all along. Why show a traitor any more respect than he deserved? But despite his triumph at Hastings, William's fight for England was far from over. The English still had no desire for a Norman king. In defiance, they nominated Edgar the Eighthling, the last remaining heir of the House of Wessex, as their ruler. And how did William react? With fire and blood. After Hastings, William marched his army toward London, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. He burned and pillaged his way across the countryside until at last he reached the city. By early December, as William crossed the Thames, the English finally surrendered. Edgar the Eighthling and several powerful nobles swore fealty to William, and this time William showed mercy. He allowed many English lords to retain their lands and titles, but any noble who had fought against William at Hastings was stripped of their lands. One day they were lords, and the next they had nothing. Finally, on Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England, but his coronation turned into a catastrophe. During William's coronation, the people of London erupted in cheers for their new king. For William, it must have felt like a triumphant moment, but then disaster struck. William's guards mistook the deafening roar for an uprising against the king. Panicked, they set several buildings on fire. What should have been a moment of glory descended into utter chaos. The coronation was ruined, but William was officially King of England. Now he just had to make sure it stayed that way. After months of solidifying his grip on England, William decided his job was done. Being King of England was more like his side hustle. Confident that things were under control, he returned to Normandy to reunite with his beloved Matilda, leaving his half-brother Odo in charge. The moment William left, rebellions erupted across England. Rival European rulers wanted a piece of his kingdom, while English rebels, many still loyal to Harold, saw an opportunity to strike. Odo did what he could, but he was no William the Conqueror. England was spiraling into chaos, and William had no choice but to return. Ruling England became an endless game of whack-a-mole. Every time William crushed one rebellion, two more seemed to spring up. After several campaigns, his grip over the country seemed secure. Once again, he set sail for Normandy for some much-needed rest. Mere months after William left, another rebellion erupted, but this one was different. Remember Edgar the Eighthling? Apparently, he preferred the title King Edgar, and he had a plan. He joined forces with the King of Denmark and launched a full-scale attack on York, one of the most important cities in northern England. Edgar stormed York, slaughtered its Norman defenders, and seized the city. It was the single greatest blow William had suffered in England, but that wasn't even the worst part. Local nobles declared Edgar the rightful king of England. Now William had a real problem on his hands. William's response to Edgar's rebellion, known as the Hurrying of the North, was nothing short of horrific. When William rushed north to York, Edgar and his men fled for their lives. Edgar escaped to Scotland while the other rebels scattered, going into hiding across the north. William had hoped to meet them in battle and end the conflict once and for all. When they refused to fight, he chose a far more devastating approach. He divided his forces into small groups and unleashed them across the north like a pack of wild dogs, their mission to burn, loot, and terrorize. If the rebels wouldn't face him in battle, William would make it so unbearable for them that they would have no choice but to submit or be destroyed. The Normans had used similar tactics before, but this time they went too far. Beyond slaughtering villagers and burning entire settlements, William's men also targeted food supplies and livestock, ensuring starvation for those who survived the initial raids, and the harsh winter that followed. Famine gripped the north. Some accounts even describe desperate survivors resorting to cannibalism to stay alive. By the time it was over, as many as 100,000 people had died from starvation alone, on top of those killed in the Norman attacks. The Harrying of the North was William the Conqueror's most ruthless act, and it worked. After witnessing the full extent of William's cruelty, no one dared to support Edgar the Eighthling. In 1074, Edgar finally surrendered, securing William's hold on England. But, spoiler alert, that security wouldn't last long. In 1075, two of William's own earls revolted, plotting to overthrow him and seize the throne for themselves. This rebellion had something none of the previous uprisings had: support from a powerful ally. Philip III, the new king of France, had had enough of William's conquering. When William trapped one of the rebellious earls in a castle in Brittany, Philip arrived with an army of his own. The two forces clashed, and for the first time in his life, William lost. Well, it had to happen eventually. Forced to retreat to Normandy, William decided to take a more cautious approach. He made peace with Philip, executed one of the treacherous earls, and imprisoned the other. And just in time, because his next betrayal would come from a source much closer to home. William didn't spend all his time conquering. He was also a family man. He and Matilda had at least 9 children, but unsurprisingly, William wasn't exactly the most supportive father, and his eldest son, Robert, felt he wasn't receiving the respect he deserved. Like many other young nobles at the time, Robert believed it was time the older generation started passing the torch, so he gathered a group of like-minded lords, assembled an army, and began raiding Normandy. William eventually cornered his rebellious son in a castle, but just when he least expected it, Robert and his men launched a surprise attack. In the chaos, Robert himself managed to knock William from his horse. For a moment, it looked like the Conqueror's days were numbered. At the last moment, an Englishman came to William's aid, saving his life. It seemed that William and Robert's relationship would not recover from this conflict, but surprisingly, the opposite happened. Apparently, the only way Robert could earn his father's respect was by defeating him in battle. Instead of continuing the fight, William broke the siege and returned home. Not long after, father and son reconciled. William even officially confirmed that Robert would inherit Normandy upon his death, and in return, Robert abandoned his rebellion. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing in England once again. The King of Scots launched a devastating raid on the already traumatized north. For over a month, Scottish forces ravaged the land, forcing William to return to England for the first time in years to restore order. But this time, he had brought a new ally with him. When William returned to England in 1080, he brought his son Robert with him. And trusting his son with the fight against the Scots, he watched as Robert quickly subdued them. Things were finally looking up for William the Conqueror, but not for long. After decades together, William's beloved wife Matilda passed. Their marriage had been close and affectionate, and her death devastated him. But he had little time to mourn, yet another betrayal was brewing. Robert, seeing his father aging and vulnerable, struck a deal with the King of France and launched yet another rebellion against his father. In his prime, William had been a formidable warrior, but old age had taken its toll. His once powerful physique had ballooned to excessive proportions, making it difficult for him to command the same fear and respect. His wife was gone, his son had turned against him once again, and he had grown so heavy that he could barely mount his horse. Most men would have surrendered, but William led his troops into battle until the very end. In 1087, while fighting against his son's French allies, William's horse reared in battle, slamming him against the pommel of his saddle with such force that it ruptured his intestines. He survived for several torturous weeks, but there was no saving him. On September 9, 1087, William the Conqueror succumbed to his injuries. With William dead, England plunged into chaos. Just like his coronation, William's funeral did not go as planned. His body was simply too large for the stone tomb prepared for him, and when attendants tried to make it fit, things took a turn for the worse. They pushed on William's abdomen so hard that it burst, spewing putrid liquid everywhere. The resulting odor was so bad that mourners flooded the church in horror. Not exactly the grand farewell one might expect for the man who reshaped England forever. Though the English crown had passed through many hands in the millennium since, every single English monarch, right up to Queen Elizabeth II, can trace their lineage back to William the Conqueror. To this day, he remains one of the most famous kings in English history, yet he never truly saw himself that way. He was always the Duke of Normandy, first and foremost. England was secondary. He only lived there for 5 years and barely left Normandy in the final 15 years of his life.